Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm very happy to be back. Today I thought I'd pick up my camera and film some new content for once. I'm sure if you've been keeping up with the recent uploads, you can see they've been coming from content that I filmed quite a while ago, but I've reset, I'm ready to get back into it. I am going back to uni next week, so I'm hoping I can balance the two, but I just felt it was time. I wanted to have a chat with you guys. So for today's video, I think we're going to be doing, I don't think, I know, we're going to be doing a bit of a sit down and a chat, which I feel like I haven't really done on the channel yet. I feel like it's something people do, you know, when stuff goes wrong on their videos, or if they've like had a break for a long time, they're like, okay, it's time for a sit down and chat. And it felt time to have one. If you've watched the most recent vlogs, you might see I had a bit of a disaster happen, and I think if you didn't keep up with my Instagram stories, you're sort of left hanging there. You're like, what actually happened? Well, the ending to that story is I came home, I'm feeling so much better. It's been a couple of weeks and I'm still quite content in my decision to come home. I was going to talk about the things that you might not have seen that I didn't put together in the vlog. I'm going to talk about why I decided to come home, as well as just, I guess, the key sort of lessons that I picked up from the trip. Because not only did I want this video to serve as a sort of like what happened, what you missed, all of that, but I wanted to put it out there just in the off chance that there is someone else out there trying solo traveling and it's not quite going to plan like my trip didn't. To know that that is also okay, that is also, it happens. One thing that I really struggled with at the time was I had seen so much content of people who might have been like worried about going on their trip at first, but when they pushed through, they're like, oh my gosh, it was like such a rewarding experience, and I was so confused as to why that wasn't happening for me. So I just wanted to put out my story there too, just to let you know that it isn't always perfect, it doesn't always work out. Because I was actually on TikTok today and there was a guy that I was following, and he'd flown to Europe alone, and then he actually just posted a video that I saw before sitting down to film this, and he was like, I left Europe earlier than I thought, it was really hard, I was struggling with being homesick, and I was like, thank you. Like, I think that's the first time I've actually seen content that was like, I did try it, I did put myself out there and go for it, and look, it just didn't work out this time. So I just wanted to add my story to the collection. Okay, I know it's not going to be the most interesting, but I'd say get your cup of tea, have a sit down if you want to listen. If you don't, that's also okay. I should be back to normal content next Sunday, so you can always just come back then. But without further ado, let's get into it. Okay. So let's talk about what happened after I left you, because in the last vlog clip, in the last series, it was day 3 of my trip, and I had picked up my rental car, driven to a Westfield in South Auckland, and I was crying in the car, and that was the first time I actually called home. I'd been holding off the whole time because I'm like, it's just going to make me more emotional, but I just was so low and I just wanted to talk to someone, so I did call home, and I think you would have seen the aftermath in that last clip there. I went into the shops, I was still very emotional, holding back tears, but I got all my jobs done, and I knew I booked in accommodation in Hamilton that night, which meant I had to drive about an hour and a half south to Hamilton for the night. But as you might have remembered, I was so tired. Like, the idea of driving at all exhausted me, and I knew I had to sleep somewhere. So I actually parked in this random sort of park area. It wasn't even a park though, I just found it, and I took an hour nap there, which was very much needed, but I was still very tired afterwards, and eventually drove down south to Hamilton. It was really hard. It was a really hard drive in the sense that I was so tired and just so emotional, and then left to my own thoughts. Otherwise, I would say it's a pretty easy drive. Like, as an Australian, driving in New Zealand, simple. Like, it was just like the same, if not just nicer scenery. But when I got to the accommodation, first off I found it, and then there were some people going in and they sort of intimidated me, so I waited in the car a bit for them to pass through, and then I went in and checked in, and the guy like opened the door to my room and there was like no one in there, and I was sort of like, oh no, because for me, I being surrounded by people meant a couple of things. It meant that I would stop being emotional, because like I don't want to cry in front of people that don't know me, and then I was like, then I can socialize, I can take my mind off it, but there was no one. And so he walked me through the area, and it wasn't the nicest hostel, which I didn't mind. Like, it doesn't have to be the greatest facilities, but there was no one there. And so I remember I went back to the car, and my original plan had been I'd go in, I'd say hi to the people there, and then I'd take a nap. But seeing there was no people there just messed with my mind so much. So I sat in the car and I called home again, because I was just so upset that there was no people there for me to interact with, because that's what I felt like I really needed. I felt so alone, and I didn't even care if they were strangers. I just wanted someone to talk to. So I cried a lot. Then finally I unpacked my stuff, and then I called my parents again, cried even more. I cried so much that evening that I looked in the mirror and I couldn't recognize myself. Like, I took a few pictures which had never seen the light of day, but like I didn't look like myself. It looked like I had been stung by a bee all around my eyes, and still in all that time no one had come into my room. Like, it was pretty much deserted, this hostel. Finally it got to like 8, and I knew I had to have dinner, but I've been so emotional. So I went and had a shower, and when I'd gone out to shower I'd seen that there was someone, but it was like a middle-aged man that just gave me off vibe, sat in the like common area. And so then that made me be like, oh, I don't even want to go out and make my dinner now. So I hopped on a call with my family, and I had them on call the whole time while I went out and made my dinner, and then I went back to my room. Like, this was a dorm for like 4 people, but no one else was there. So I went back to the room and had dinner. So by the time I'd finished dinner and I went back out to like brush my teeth, pack up all my stuff, more of these people, like middle-aged guys that just weren't the vibe, had appeared in that like common area. And it was like late at night too. And I think what had happened was New Zealand had like killed a lot of its tourism over COVID, and so a lot of the people that were staying at the hostels in these more deserted areas were people that just simply couldn't afford to, I guess, live there, like have a house or actually rent a house. They were just staying in the shared accommodation in these dorms. So it just wasn't the vibe I was looking for. And then when I went to sleep, it was pretty late, and I remember there just being like weird noises outside my door, and I just did not like it. And I was like so on edge, because I knew, because it was a shared room, at any point someone could be coming in to like take one of the bunks, and it just had me very on edge. So once again I was on call home that whole night until I like fell asleep, and I just remember the room being so, it was like made to make me uncomfortable because of a few things that I'm going to mention. Firstly, the lights. There were no lamps. Like, the only lights, there were like these 2 fluorescent strip lights that were the only things lighting up the room, and the switch to them was next to the door. So it was either be in complete darkness or have these bright, really bright lights on above me, and I like didn't like either of those options. The second thing was there was like only one power point in the whole room, and it was in like the most awkward position for like any of the beds, which meant when I was on call I was worried my phone was gonna like die, and then I wouldn't have any way to contact anyone. So I had my phone plugged into my portable charger the whole time, and luckily that worked. And then even the next morning when I tried to plug in my portable charger into this PowerPoint, I'm pretty sure it didn't even work. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention is the doona only covered half my body, and I know like my mum was literally like on the phone, go get one of the other beds, but I was like in such a bad mood. I was like, no. So I literally had to have my puffer jacket on my top half, and because the doona only covered like the bottom half of my legs. So anyway, so it was a pretty bad night. I finally got to sleep, but then I was woken up early because there were like loud noises coming from outside my room at like 5 AM I want to say. Anyways, that morning I packed up my stuff and I was like, I'm never staying there again, I need to get out of here. But once again I was still super tired, so I wasn't like comfortable enough to drive much further. I didn't feel comfortable driving back to Auckland or like anywhere far, so I knew I was going to still be in Hamilton. So I went and sat in the car, and once again called home after I'd checked out, and we were sort of like, look, I should probably just get like a hotel or motel room in the area and just go and sleep if I can. So that is what I was planning on my phone. My parents like sent me the options that they thought were best, and then I just booked one of them. And then in that time the car that I had hired started leaking. So like, we're in New Zealand, it was in winter, but it had been like raining the whole trip. Well, not the whole trip, that's a lie, but a lot of the trip. And so this day it was bucketing, and so I sat in the car, and the car was in the rain, but I was in the car, and the car starts leaking, and so it starts dripping over the passenger seat onto the like center console beside me and a little bit on the side. So like, it was raining inside my car, and I was like, well, that's just great, that's just like the icing on the cake. So I knew I'd have to call up the rental place about the car. But after we booked that, I still wasn't able to go check into my accommodation, so I went to a shopping centre where I got some lunch, and then I remember I still had time to kill, or I probably should have just stayed in the shopping centre, but I was like so upset, so I went back to the car and had another cry in the car until it hit 2 p.m. and I could finally drive over to the next accommodation. So I went to the motel and I checked in, and then I was in an upstairs room, so I just walked up to the room and I was trying to unlock the door, and then I dropped my phone in this puddle of water right in front of the door. And so I just picked it up, I opened the door, I went inside, and I once again kept crying. So I cried for a few hours there, then I called home and kept crying, and it was like really great arvo, and we sort of had a chat as a family, and it was like, well, I kind of need to make a decision about what I want to do, because this car thing, I called up the car place and they had said that they didn't have a place in Hamilton where I could swap out the car at the time, they said. So they were like, you probably have to just drive it back to Auckland for us and we'll give you a different car, or we'll give you your money back. Or later they did find that they could like swap out the car for me in Hamilton with a different company. So that night was left to a lot of thinking. I had to decide, do I want to take that out? Because keep in mind, the only thing keeping me in New Zealand at that time was I had this car hire for about another week. So I was like, do I take this out and get rid of the car, get my money back and just go home? Do I stay around Auckland? Do I do something else? So I was tossing up a lot of options there, and what actually helped me in the end was getting input from lots of people around me, because I knew I was very much in an emotional state where I didn't trust myself to make the best decision. So I'd been talking to my parents, they sort of thought I should come home. I was talking to some of my friends, and they were like, look, it's not a vibe where you are, maybe try somewhere else, and then if that's not a vibe, come home, which I also got. And then other people where they agreed, you know, solo traveling could be like quite a lonely thing, and like it's fine to just go home. I did kind of want to try somewhere else, but the thing holding me back was I was just so exhausted from the trip. I was just emotionally exhausted by everything, and I did at that point, I was like, I want to go home. That night I made the decision to book a flight home, because going to Queenstown, where I thought a lot of the people would be, was going to be super expensive because it was school holidays time. So I just bit the bullet. I was like, I'm going to take that out of the car. I couldn't stay in Auckland too long because the hostel that I liked best was pretty busy, so I couldn't get many nights stay there. And yeah, it was just the easiest way to get out and lose the least amount of money possible than I already had. That was the decision that was made. I had a day to kill there, and then I had a day in Auckland, I want to say, and then I came home. So I think the main issue was me being emotional. I was emotional for a number of reasons, but it was mainly not knowing what to do. Like, I was so stuck. I was so sure, you know, everyone says you just stick it out, you get through the tough stuff, and then it's like the most rewarding thing ever. But then in my head, I'd been doing that for a few days and I couldn't see it getting any better. Like, I'd heard from other people, this was the other thing, when I'd been at the Auckland hostel, a lot of the people that had been traveling before me or done like my trip in reverse are like, it's really lonely. Like, some people had gone a week without seeing or talking to other travelers, and I was like, oh, that's not what I signed up for, because they were like, this hostel in Auckland was the best one that they'd been in the whole of New Zealand, and I was sort of like, oh no, so it's like only downhill from here. So once again, I wanted to like stick it out. And I was like, maybe if I stick it out a couple more days, but unfortunately the options that I was being presented with were sort of, you know, cut it off now or keep going and commit to like at least another week. I didn't like either of those options because I was like, I go home, I'd be embarrassed, I'd be sad that I didn't get to travel, or I keep going and I might be miserable and feel like I wasted all my money. And I was like, I don't know. I was also emotional, or I guess sad in a sense, because I didn't realise how much for me, I think my sense of safety is reliant on just being around people. Like I don't have to be interacting with them, but a certain type of people and vibe I need to be in for me to feel, I guess, comfortable. I didn't realise that would be such an issue for me. Another thing was when I got to somewhere really cool, when say I went to Mount Eden, I think you probably actually saw it on the vlog. It's when you see it and you're like, damn, this is cool. It was almost sad. It was like, I felt sad. I wouldn't say it's sad for everyone, but it was upsetting that no one else was seeing it with me. And it was actually quite painful. It was like, I kind of wish that I don't see anything cool while I don't have anyone with me. It was a weird thing. And also because beforehand I had been presented with the option, my parents were like, if you want one of us to join you, we can. I just felt stupid because I was like, well, I could have been sharing this experience with someone that I cared about, and I was selfish and I was like, no, I need to do it by myself and prove it to myself. So I just felt stupid in that sense. I was like, why did I not just take someone up on that offer? Why did I feel like I had to do this for myself? So I think something I've realised there too is, for me, cool travelling memories, half of the like value of them for me is having someone to share them with, whether that is someone that I know or someone that I have met. But there didn't seem like a lot of potential for me to meet people to share those memories with in New Zealand. So I've come home. It's been, I think, well, I want to say almost 3 weeks since I've been home, and I've done a lot of thinking on the topic, thinking about what happened and that. What's really helped me in analysing, I guess, what went down was thinking about, okay, why did I want to go on this trip? Why did I feel I had to go to New Zealand by myself? So I would say I wanted to see New Zealand, but once again, I could have seen it with family, I could have seen it with friends. Like, why did I have to go by myself? I think the reason I wanted to go alone was because I wanted to experience more like that backpacker life and like stay at hostels and stuff, which I wouldn't have been able to do with my family. And that also, by being alone rather than with friends, would make me more approachable and easy to talk to people, because I wanted to talk to people from all over the world. Like, that's one of my favourite things, and learning about their lives and all of that. That was the other goal, and the other thing was to prove that I could do it by myself for a month. But in retrospect, looking at the options that I was presented with, I wasn't really going to have a lot of opportunities to fulfill that second option, which had been pushing for why I had to be by myself for it. And so I think I would have really struggled with that throughout. As much as I can say I could have done it, but I just didn't want to. I know that I can't, foresee that I could have done it, but I'd like to think that way. But essentially I could see now that not all my goals would have been achievable, and maybe I would have achieved some of them, but I wouldn't have felt like I used my resources and time in a way that allowed me to achieve all of the goals that I had wanted to. But the 3 lessons that I would say I've learned as well is that stuff goes wrong. Stuff goes wrong no matter what. I think there was like a quote, it's like, shit happens, you can always expect shit to happen, but you can't tell what shit's gonna happen. And I think that is so true. And something that I did think initially going into this is, because I was so determined and wanted to achieve all these goals, that I thought it would be easy for me to do so, but that isn't the case. Just because you're determined doesn't mean you're not going to get thrown curveballs and all of that. The second thing I think I've learnt, or I could say I've learnt, is how to make tough decisions, because I think a lot of the time we are faced with these like decisions where there isn't necessarily a right answer. Like, maybe you've got 2 crappy outcomes. I think in those situations, all you can do is sort of, you've got to look at each of the paths you're being presented with, all the expenses, whether it's going to be like short-term, long-term happiness, actual money, all of that stuff, time, and make the decision that you feel is best for you in the moment, and then make that the right decision. And so what I mean by that is, I don't think there was a right or more right decision of whether I continued in New Zealand or I came home. I think I could have continued in New Zealand. I might not have had the greatest time. I might have had a few cool moments that may have made it all worth it. I might have met friends and been like one of the better trips than what I'd expected it to be. I could have like stuck it out and just been able to be proud that I stuck it out. Or I could have taken this path where I came home, I took a few days, but much more quickly got back to a happier state, got to see all my friends, got to go see a Louis Tomlinson concert. Got to go to the movies, got to keep working on so many of the projects that I'm passionate about. So both of them I think would have been fine choices, but what would have made them fine was me making them the right decision. And so what I mean by that is when I made the decision to come home, I decided I wasn't going to be sad about it for the entire time that I could have been in New Zealand, because then I might as well have stayed in New Zealand. I could have been sad in New Zealand. But instead, when I came home, I was like, I'm going to make an effort to be a lot happier. I'm going to keep working a lot of the projects that I enjoy working on. For example, my YouTube, some other projects that I have in the making, as well as developing my portfolio for architecture and design and urban planning and, you know, applying for a couple of jobs. It was my actions and what I did with the time after that made it the right decision for me. And so I guess that's in a sense not playing the victim. If I sat here being like, oh my gosh, the world is horrible, I'm going to be so miserable, I would have only been kidding myself. I would have only been sacrificing my own time and my own happiness if I had done that. So that's lesson 2. There is no right decision. You need to make it right. And then the last thing is, over COVID, very much so, we, or at least me definitely, got into the mindset of when the opportunities present themselves or the time presents themselves, I've got to take hold of them as quick as possible, because you know, you never know when you're going to go back into lockdown or some other pandemic's going to come across. So for me, I was so set on going away as soon as possible, doing it by myself as soon as possible, and I sort of put this pressure on myself that when I was in New Zealand, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to get the chance to travel again anytime soon. Something crazy could happen, so why am I wasting it and just going home? But I think in a sense I've been putting a bit too much pressure on the now and doing it now, because there's nothing wrong with staying at home and having a good time and just enjoying doing nothing as well. So that's our last lesson. Stop putting so much pressure on the now. It's all about balance with that one, and I think I definitely exceeded it, being like, I need to stay here, I need to go, go, go. That was a bit of a long one, I think, but that's all I've got written down in my notes for what I wanted to talk about in this session today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it cleared up some of the loose ends that I might have left with those previous vlogs and previous clips that I've been uploading, and I hope, I guess maybe you can learn from the lessons that I picked up from this disaster and not have to go through it yourself. But I guess the moral of the story here is that stuff goes wrong, and even when solo traveling, as determined as you might be, you might not get it the way in which you wanted to, and I just wanted to put my story out there in case anybody else is feeling the same way. I do not regret choosing to come home. It was disappointing, it was really hard at first, but it was my decision, and I'm going to stay confident in why I made it. I weighed up my options as best I could in the moment, and I'm confident that all I did was my best. So be it. If anyone cares or anyone wants to say anything bad about it, so what? And I'm hoping that next Sunday we'll be back to normal, well, sort of normal uploads. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. See you next week.